what the spiritual journey of waking up requires of us these days is to become a master. To stop seeking the master, the guru up there, and actually become a master ourselves. You become the master. What do I mean by that? I mean surfing on the razor's edge. On that edge, you're neither falling back asleep, falling back asleep into the unconscious state where you identify with the separate self. The separate self that sees opposition, that sees the enemy, that sees problems, that operates from divided mind, that flaps about on the surface. Running away and running towards. That drowns in the waves, in the turbulence of the ocean. So neither tipping one side and falling back asleep, but neither staying in the elevated transcendent state in which everything's perfect, there's only bliss, there's only the realization of no self. If I'm not the self identified by ego, then there's nobody here, and the world doesn't exist because it's an illusion. So everything is perfect, and I am perfect, and there's no more humanity. That's called spiritual bypassing, which is incredibly common in spiritual seekers. How do we surf that edge where we have realized true nature as the ever-present consciousness, and the tight knot of ego has dissolved? And yet, how do we know ourselves as that and still operate in the earthly world in which having a sense of self is absolutely necessary? Otherwise we wouldn't be able to do anything. We wouldn't be able to communicate. We wouldn't be able to cross the road. We wouldn't be able to do our shopping. We wouldn't be able to survive. So here is the conundrum. How can we be both? Not both as something we flit in and out of. It's not that we realize true nature when we're happy and everything's going our way, and then when things go wrong, we've fallen back into the human state of reactivity, emotionality, and so on. How can we truly be both? In other words, how can we be in the world but not of the world? That's profound. That's not something that we can learn with some methods by doing a few workshops. To be in the world but not of the world requires a profound inquiry in you. It means being willing to listen from a deeper place. To listen to yourself from a deeper place. In other words, to listen from that which is deeper than the acquisitive mind. The acquisitive mind wants to get somewhere, wants to get more knowledge, wants to know, wants to grasp, wants to possess, wants to take ownership of its experience. This acquisitive mind, you can also call it the ego, the egoic mind, is the unconscious state. When we do not know ourselves, when we believe ourselves to be that voice inside the acquisitive mind. To be that voice that wants to be safe, that wants to be secure. I'm not talking on a physical level, that's necessary. On an animal level, if you like, on a body level, we need to be safe and secure. I'm talking on a mental level, psychological level. To listen from that which is deeper than acquisitive mind requires such a letting go, such a willingness to release that tight grip, to stop giving our allegiance to that voice that drives the acquisitive mind. The inquiry that I talk about, the inquiry that is necessary if we are to be fully awake and fully human, if we are to be in the world but not of it, requires us to look at ourselves, to ask ourselves, to be honest with ourselves. What stands in the way of this unclenching that is required for us to listen from a deeper place? To listen from a deeper place means we stop coming from reactivity, we stop coming from division, we stop seeing division. We stop compartmentalizing our experience into good and bad, right and wrong, should and shouldn't be happening. The acquisitive mind thrives on it should or it should not be happening. If it should be happening, then it will seek that. And it will seek to possess that experience. It's a good experience. It's a nice experience. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel happy. It makes me feel successful. It makes me feel like I've arrived somewhere. It makes me feel special. So it will seek that state. And if it shouldn't be happening, it will reject that state. It makes me feel bad. It makes me feel unworthy, unspecial, unloved, and so on. The acquisitive mind lives in division. To listen from a non-divided state, an undivided state, means we stop categorizing our experience into it should or it shouldn't be happening. But in order to come to a place where we can even begin to end that division, we have to listen. And that's what inquiry is. It's about telling the truth and listening to the truth in ourselves by asking the right questions and then being honest about what comes up in response. Asking the right questions. Discovering the nature of suffering in you. being honest about where there is suffering, where you are fighting the world or fighting your experience, making an enemy out of your feelings, rejecting, suppressing, denying, running away from. If you're honest and you look at that, that creates suffering. It's not the feeling that creates suffering. It's not the experience you're having that's creating suffering. It's the rejection of it that creates suffering. And then once you see that, you can ask a little bit deeper. Are you willing to stop? Are you willing to stop the denial? Are you willing to stop rejecting your experience? Are you willing to stop making an enemy out of what is here? Because only if you are truly willing to end the war within can you start to wake up out of the dream of separation. Can you start to wake up out of egoic identity? Egoic identity is created out of this division. It's created out of it should be happening and it shouldn't be happening. It's created of I am lucky or I am not unlucky. I am good or I am bad. Because circumstances either conform to my wishes, to my likes, to my desires, or they do not conform. They seem to be in opposition. When we see the world in this divided way, then we strengthen egoic identity. We strengthen the self, the false self, the self that wants to be right, the self that is righteous about what's right and wrong about my experience. And then we live in the dream of separation, and that creates suffering. So inquiry is the process of examining all of that. Not in any linear way, not in any particular step-by-step way, but by the conversations, the dialogues that arise spontaneously when we gather. And because that inquiry starts to become alive in you, because there's a genuine seeking for the peace that is always here, whether things are good or things are bad, whether life's going your way or not going your way. There's a genuine seeking of presence, because presence brings us into intimacy with life. And only when we are fully intimate with life, whether it's going your way or not going your way, can there be real richness in our human experience. So waking up is not about avoiding the human experience. It's not some bland state where nothing happens. On the contrary, it's a deep intimacy with life. It's rich in its depth and its breadth. It's exquisite in its agony and its ecstasy. It includes all polarities, but it doesn't get lost in those. It doesn't get lost in dark or in light, because it doesn't derive its identity from that. You are neither good nor bad because there is an experience of darkness. You are neither good nor bad if you're having an experience of lightness. To wake up is to not derive your identity from experience, from circumstance, and yet to be fully engaged with the human experience, so that nothing is avoided, everything is deeply accepted. Accepted because you feel it, and feelings don't kill you. So what's the point of pushing it away, avoiding it? Because that just strengthens the ego identity. You see, when we can surf the wave of life without either spiritually bypassing or drowning in the human mess, when we can ride that wave, we become masters. What's really happened in that is that the ego, the acquisitive mind, I use those terms interchangeably, has stopped being the master, has stopped being the one that rules how you operate in life, has stopped being the one that tortures you, torments you with endless narratives of shoulds and shouldn'ts, rights and wrongs. When the false master essentially dies because you've stopped feeding it with your allegiance, with your attention, with believing it to be true, with believing it to be who you are. When you stop feeding it with that, it essentially dies. It dies as the master of you, as the one that's controlling you and your life. And it falls. It falls back into its rightful place. It dies as the tight knot of self and becomes open. It falls into beingness. It transforms. It transforms as a servant of that which is true. And in that way, you have become the master, not the master that replaces it as the controller, but you have mastered the art of being awake and being human.